one of a few videos that are going to cover JavaScript in a little bit more detail. I'm going to start at the very beginning. So this video is going to cover essentially the basics of different data types within JavaScript. So if you've never written any code before or you're confused, you should start here. If you've used JavaScript before, maybe skim through the video, see if there's anything useful for you. So I'm going to cover the different data types and how to basically work with data in JavaScript. One of the great things about JavaScript is that it's a very robust language. It can do lots of stuff. It really doesn't have a lot of hang-ups. It's also one of the possible problems with JavaScript in that it's very forgiving. So it lets you do all kinds of crazy stuff, and it doesn't always sort of return what you expect it might do. I'll cover that in a little bit of detail. If you're wondering, why should I watch this? Am I going to be using JavaScript at all? The main, areas where you would be using JavaScript is if you're going to be modifying any kind of information on the page. So if you're going to be responding to when a user clicks on something, you're going to move an element around or something like that. Or if you're going to be pulling in data from, Google Maps or Twitter or Instagram or something like that, then you're going to want to be processing that data. So you're going to be using JavaScript to kind of go through a loop of items that are coming back from the API, and maybe you grab the image and display it or something like that. All those things require JavaScript. So if that's your project, and you don't know JavaScript, you should watch this video. I'm going to be using the developer tools in Chrome. This is really one of the best ways to play around with JavaScript because it's interactive. So it tells you immediately if something's gone wrong or what is happening in the code. You can customize the console by going to the settings here. This kind of gives you a little bit of an overview of the kind of shortcuts that are available. I'll go through all these quickly so that you can be efficient when you're using the console. So the console expects you to write JavaScript in here. So if you write anything arbitrary, it's going to give you immediately an error and say, I don't understand what this is. So that's the interactive part. That's really nice. You can use tab completion in the console. So if you hit the tab key, it'll complete something that you started to type. Right? And you can use the up and down keys to kind of pick what you're doing. This is great because it eliminates typos. You can also use the up and down keys to repeat stuff you've written. So if I press up, I get to what I've written last. So if you're writing a long statement and you get one syntax error because you misspelled something, you don't have to rewrite it. You just hit up and then go into that statement and correct it. You can use Apple K to clear the console. That's about it. And I'll be using this throughout the video, so you'll see the stuff in practice. Two important functions of the console to keep in mind that you can use throughout your code is console.log, which basically takes some kind of a piece of data and writes it back to the console. Seems really straightforward, but this is a really great function to use inside of your JavaScript code. Say you have a lot of code and you just need to verify at different points that what's happening in the code is actually what you're expecting to happen. So you'd use a console.log statement inside of your JavaScript to write out, the contents of different variables. For example, say you're showing a number of pictures and you want to make sure that the 10th one, has a certain border on it. You would write out maybe each picture that you're showing and make sure that the 10th one has the kind of border you need. For example, I know it's pretty abstract. I'll get into using these statements throughout this video, so you'll see how it works. But keep in mind there's just two. There's .log, and there's .dir, which is kind of like log, but just provides more information. So I'm not sure if it's going to provide more information right now because this is not really defined, so there are no properties. But generally, if you have arrays or objects or something like that, if you use the .dir statement, you're generally going to get this triangle, which allows you to drill into a variable and inspect, what's inside of it. Okay, so let's talk about data types. So everything in JavaScript is an object. So that's one thing to keep in mind. What that means is that objects are basically like containers for different properties, right? So console is an object. Using the dot, typing the dot accesses a certain property, or in this case, a function of it, which is called dir and takes an argument and returns something. So if everything's an object, the data types in JavaScript which there's really only 4. There's numbers, there's strings, which are basically text, like this. And then there's arrays, which are lists of things. And then there's object literals, which are official objects, sort of. So everything's an object, but the data types are kind of like subtypes of objects. So they're different kinds of objects. So what that means is that they have different behaviors and they have different kinds of properties. Different behaviors in the sense of, if I have 2 objects that are numbers and I add them together, I'm going to get something else than if I have 2 objects that are pieces of text and I add them together. So, for example, if I make a number x, and I say x is 1, right, I can do x plus 10, and as you would expect, I get 11. I can also add 2 numbers together, so I can make z equals 12, x plus z is 13. As you would expect, it pretty much works just like numbers do. So I can make a simple function here, which functions are basically kind of like shortcuts. You know, they're just repeatable things you might have in your code. If you find yourself writing the same thing over and over again, you just use a function to make things more convenient for you. So a function is defined by just writing the word function and then giving it a name. This can obviously be anything. And then you do an open parentheses and then you give it a bunch of parameters. So I'm just going to give it 2 parameters, a and b. These can be anything. Then you use the curly brackets, which curly brackets in the code generally are, they delineate scope in official terms, but generally it just means that when you use a bracket, you're sort of drilling one level deeper into the code. And it's important that brackets always need to match, just like parentheses. So when you have an open curly bracket, you eventually need a closed curly bracket to get back to the level you were before. So in this function example, the curly bracket denotes that we're going inside of the function. So in this line, we're writing something that happens inside the function. And in the next line, we would get back out of the function. I'm using option and enter to make a new line. Okay, so let me get rid of that. And then functions, operate on the parameters that are passed to them. And generally, functions will return something. So to do that, you just write the word return. So I'm going to return a plus b, right, since I'm making an adding function. Okay, so there's my function. Right, so now I can use this and add 1 and 2 together.